we're going to take a look at Gathering Storm. This is the prequel for A World at War, and necessary, and in fact, the very reason I bought A World at War and paid, $100 and something bucks on, was the idea that, well, I have the old Advanced Third Reich Rising Sun. I liked them. I remembered really liking them. I was going to get back to them, but then I heard about this and said, all right, Days of Decision never quite did it for me. The old Days of Decision 2, 3, they're a little more interesting as a wrapper around World in Flames. But there were things I really liked about the Advanced Third Reich system that I wanted very badly to have, a prequel. Now, unfortunately, like a number of people, I didn't do a hell of a lot of research on the game. I just said, we must have pretty. I've gone crazy about A World at War and everything associated with it, simply because there's been this weird, mental thing in the way. So when I found out this was coming out, I wanted to buy a copy of A World at War, but I figured, well, I bet you the game will actually make it not only to, it'll make it to a fall sale, but it might even make it to the bargain bin. So instead of $200, I'll probably be playing, $50 or whatever. Well, I saw a copy at Consim World. I bought that for, I don't remember what. I think $70. 70, I think that's what it was. And I looked at that and said, that's saves me the shipping, and that's the price I want to pay. Unfortunately, I didn't look carefully. I bought the 2003 edition, so I turned around and resold it to somebody for $50, which was a fairer price, to tell you the truth. And I explained the issue with it to him, hoping that somebody would take it off my hands. Not that it's a horrible purchase. It's just it meant that I would have had to use the living rolls online. And that's not an option for me. I don't play with tablets and stuff like that. I want a rule book. Of course, the actual rule book to A World at War looks like it's going to fall apart, and I'm going to need, maybe before I finish one play, and I'm going to need to go to the electronic rules. Of course, it may just be a complete wash and something worth pitching if it's not that much better than the Third Reich Rising Sun. Yeah, well, if it's not significantly worse. If it is significantly worse, let's put it that way. It's certainly not going to be better. It's more complex, but everything looks kind of bolted on, kind of funny. So then there's this. And I bought this also with that same blindness of, must have. And unfortunately, what I did not realize when I pre-ordered it was, hey, no Asia. And indeed, there is no Asia. This only covers diplomatic, military build-up, and research for the European powers. Forget the U.S., forget Japan, forget all the big strategic, options that you might have in a Days of Decision, World in Flames combined game. That's all gone. All you got is, something very focused. Okay. Well, I paid my $120 with shipping, I think, on a fall sale for A World at War. I broke down and bought this for $65. I got to give them a chance, So I started on the rules. And the rules for this, I got my issues with A World at War's rules, right? But the rules for this put those rules to shame. Okay, these are just incomprehensible. These are among the worst rules that may have a complete game in them. I'm still not convinced they do, or I'm not convinced that I'm playing the complete game. I set aside and played a couple of turns, try to see how it's going. And so far my impression is there ain't much game here. There sure are a really, really hard to understand rules. To begin with, the rules don't bother to give you any kind of setup for the game. Okay, this is your setup for the game. These are not explained. I had to print something off to see how somebody interpreted the way you find the setup for the game for the rules. If all you have is what's in the game box, it seems to be embedded in every single rule. There's individual pieces. So, for example, when you're talking about factories, they'll tell you which factories you start with. When they're talking about, ships, that start on the board, they tell you which ones, or that start on the shipbuilding track, they tell you which ones you have. They do not tell you how to use these charts, how to display what's reflected on them, or how to analyze them or assess them in any way. In fact, they also don't tell you how to use any of the other materials in here, including the research charts. You can kind of guess, I mean, it's what I've come up with after I got the initial setup, that somebody actually spent the time to go through the rules and try to hunt all the pieces of setup out. Feels like that is the complete game, but I have to tell you, there's not much there if I'm right. Now, there may be a lot more going on. You've got components in here that have nothing to do with this game. They're a World at War replacement components. I don't know why these exist. These are, so the World at War ones, one of the problems is they're back printed, so you can't use them, you can't use the sheets as given, but they're kind of a slightly sturdier stock, and so you might actually want to tear them out. They're perforated, they were good for that. These aren't. These are written on glossy paper that you can't write on except with, something like a Sharpie. You're not going to get away with pencil on that, I don't think. And so you got to photocopy it, which seems to be the issue anyway. Maybe there's some little tweaks in it. This is stuff that could have been provided online. But, if you got to print it out anyway, if it's an unusable sheet as it stands, I'm not sure that it needed to be included in here. I'm not sure that it didn't. Also, my copy came with, and this is a pretty common error, 2 copies of, I think, the Armor Infantry Balance of Power chart and none of the Air Naval. Now, GMT is fantastic about, any kind of, error in the assembly and production and whatever. With a lot of games, they've been pretty good recently with, oh boy, we really screwed up. Those rules are, wow. No, we didn't mean to sell you that shit. We'll send you new rules. This game would be probably the highest candidate for that. I know they're planning on doing that with. I know they did it with a Supreme Commander where there were some serious screw-ups, and I know that the intention is, although it's been over a year, with them continually saying it's coming. For the game A World at Won by the Sword, which should be down here somewhere. There it is. Which I haven't even played because I'm waiting for them to rewrite the rules. Those rules were nowhere near as bad as these. I mean, those rules might have their errors. They might have their incomprehensible paragraphs in them. This set of rules doesn't give you an idea of what the game is about when you read it. I've read it through twice, no clue. Towards the end of the rulebook, you begin to start putting together what it is. Then when you start to play it, you realize, well, first of all, I have no idea how to set it up, and that's not in here, right? This also comes with some additional rule books. I want to transition over to the World at War rules, which this is important if you're playing as anybody. I can't. From what I've seen of this game, I can't imagine playing it without using it as the prequel. Unlike Days of Decision, it doesn't really look like a good standalone game. It has a scoring system, but it seems kind of weird. I don't know. Maybe if it had comprehensible rules, it would be worthwhile. And then it has this battle manual, which gives you a glossary of some key concepts. And every time I've tried to look something up in there, it's not in there. And then, an explanation of what the counters are. And then, how to use some of these informational counters. There are things that aren't even in here, though, like these guys. I don't know what they're for, There's actually quite a few counters. There's a counter that's described in the rules that doesn't appear to be in here, nor in the counter mix. That's what this factory is. I'm using it to indicate the European Aggression Index. I don't seem to have a marker that indicates that it's referred to, but it doesn't show up in here. And then we have some description on the different random events classes. This actually goes into more depth than most, and then when a country does an aggression, what the effects of that are once it's successful. And again, those are kind of useful, and then Russian cohesion. So these are nice player aids, and once you know these are here, they might help you boil down some of the questions that you have when you read the rulebook, because they're not, you know, well referred into in general, although they might say in the battle manual. Basically, by reading the rules without that right next to you, without all the pieces spread out and set up correctly, you're probably not going to have an idea of what the hell's going on at all. I still didn't have an idea even after looking at the components, trying to put the rules together in my head. But once I started fiddling some pieces around, I start to see, okay, I see how this kind of flows, and now I kind of have an idea. So I think it's possible for me to give a rules introduction here. I can't give any guarantees on it. I know there's some playthroughs and stuff online. I don't know if they're video yet, but whatever. This is my tackling of this. And maybe somebody who knows what's going on can say, oh, dude, there's actually a game in here. You're wrong, man. Look, you're missing these huge parts. That's quite possible. There's a lot of rules to this book, and there just doesn't seem to be much reason for it. It feels like it should be maybe a 6-page Euro in terms of what there is. And there may be some battle manual that has all kind of details, charts that handle, you know, how these things operate. But it's not explained in a way that applies to that, which would be really kind of going with this pictorial representation and working through it that way. Or it's also not explained in any way that you can just kind of read it, which would be, of course, what I'd prefer, and kind of get an idea what the game's about and what these different processes are. Instead, I don't know how it's written. I don't know what to say, because it feels like huge pieces are left out of it. All right, so let's look at some of the components, I guess. You got a map board with, you know, little divisions between the countries. The countries are going to have different charts on them, or different tracks on them. So in general, most of them have a diplomatic track. Some of them have a little civil war track that are vulnerable to possible civil wars. They have a flag to tell you what the country is, along with the name. They have 2 values on them. Let's see. This is sort of their aggression rating, how hard they're going to be to conquer. And in general, that's going to be a single number. But in some cases, it's a split number. So like Yugoslavia could, because of the Civil War, divide into a couple countries or something, or maybe become harder or become easier to attack because they're in the midst of a civil war. I'm not sure which of those is the case. I don't remember what that red number is for. Oh, no. The black is the defensive value, which is what I just described. The red is the aggression value, which will determine how much this country is worth. It'll give you victory points at the end of the game, I guess, and it'll also give you additional events. I think it's 1 per turn. The different territories are divided into regions. They're color-coded over here, so you can try to find them. So, for example, West Europe is Ireland, Belgium, and Spain. You know, most of them are contiguous, though. You have a turn record track, using up the most possible space. But that's kind of useful because there's some things that you have to mark down as being later. So like when Ethiopia has been conquered, the Italians will get that counter. And this was a good way to mark that they'll conquer Ethiopia. I don't know how much there is that's going to go on there, though. And there's certainly no instructions to put things on there. You just have these huge boxes. You have these huge boxes over here, which are not explained, but appear to be where you throw your activity chits when you're done. They're referred to a little bit. You have a few tracks here. The economic climate track, which is pretty simple. That's going to be determined by a random event. And it affects the income of these countries as noted, and has no effect on Russian income, and it may also affect the EAI, the European Aggression Index, which is, remember, the thing that I don't have a counter for. That moves and slowly deteriorates from whatever position it's in over time. We have a balance of power. Now this seems to be an important factor in the game. First of all, it affects some of the things that you can do, but it also affects sort of the victory conditions to the whole game. That's going to be tracked, as far as I can tell, on these two charts. And what you have is, if you got more stuff than your opponent, then you get a bonus. So for example here, I've got more armor stuff than the Allies do, and it's Axis versus Western Allies. European Axis versus Western Allies. So I got one more stuff, so I check here, and if I've got 1 or 2 excess counters, I get +1, and that's this, and maybe that's what these markers are for, is to try to indicate, you know, what the point difference is in each of those, and that works fine. It's just not explained, you know. But that's what it kind of looks like. And then here I get another +1. Over here I get a 0. And over here it's in the Western Allies' favor because of the starting Royal Navy. So there's a -2. So the net of it all comes out to 0 for the balance of power, which shows up here. Great. We'll see in the balance of power chart. But I think these actually affect your support levels. Okay. So support level is sort of the top thing on the track, and that again is going to affect some of the activities that you can do in terms of you know, your income, for one thing. Okay. What else do we have? We have some weird stuff like over here, research results. These are results that have already been gotten and are marked down, gosh, somewhere. Well, I actually don't know where those are marked. Oh, here they are. So they're put into this balance of power thing. So like the strategic bombers, the naval air training are on there. I don't know why they're here. They certainly don't belong on there. I don't think I first matched them over there, but that doesn't make much sense. They only really have an effect if they're over there. Again, you know, the visual graphics are not really explained, and the game absolutely relies on you being able to understand these. You know, nobody bothered to take that step. Over here, yeah, so for example, these Japanese, I think those are just there and counting against the Russians. I think that's what there is. I have no idea what this counter is for. I haven't been able to figure it out, so I've been playing without it. You have this little purge track. You got to collect up a certain number of purges for Russia to start becoming effective, and each turn they're going to be getting one of these 4 purge cards. And what you do is you basically take the 3 you didn't have last turn. Well, before the Rhineland's been reoccupied, but anyway, before the Rhineland's been reoccupied, you don't have the Great Purge card, which is sort of a dual purge. But basically what happens is you shuffle 3 cards or 2 earlier in the game and draw one of them. Well, that sounds pretty damn impossible. This is to keep there from being any dice in the game. It's much easier if you roll a die for that. And there's a number of places where you might want to roll a die instead of taking taking into account what the game's actual components and rules tell you to do. All right, let's talk about these chits. So we got these pool of chits here, and then some of them are here in the cup. And what you do is you initially seed the cup with something of 20 of each denomination. These are essentially, as far as I can tell, your money in the game. When you get your income, you take it in those denominations. And it doesn't seem to really matter what denominations you take, but there's specific rules that say you can't take 3 ones, or more than 3 ones. I guess the reason for that is you could kind of screw up other people's ability to take, you know, if they had a number that they needed a 1 for, you'd screw up their ability to take that. I guess. I have no idea. The rest are in here, and you'll be drawing randomly from here, and that's kind of this random modifier to your income each turn. In addition to that, you have this big pile of random event cards, a huge pile, and it has a number of sections. First up here tells you about so one of these random event cards is going to be drawn at the beginning of the turn, and it affects everyone, and it's open. And it tells you the economic trend for the turn, and it gives you a few different events that are in play for that turn. The others are country-specific ones, and essentially each player draws one of these, but certain players can get additional ones. And if you have additional ones, you have some control. You don't have to play them, but you must play if you only have one. If you have one that's in gray, a little gray box, that means you can kind of keep it hidden until it takes effect. If it's in white, it's an open one throughout the turn, and everybody knows what's going to happen. And those are going to kind of tell you things you have to do point-wise. So, for example, Italian support level -1, EIA -1. So Italy would get a little -1 marker on here somehow to try to denote, up on the support level, to try to denote that they have less support. Now, it doesn't really tell you which counters to use, and it doesn't really tell you how to utilize these tracks to indicate the numbers. To one extent, you might just keep your stuff piled over to the side and use one counter on it to try to indicate what's going on. I've tried to do this more the way I've seen other people doing it, which is to spread them out like this. But again, the game doesn't explain how to use these charts. So, you could just be doing them on paper, as far as I can tell, or, whatever. But there's a value there, and however you want to denote that value is fine, is I guess what I'm saying. And then they suggest using Scrabble tiles, now tile tracks, to hold these things, but what's kind of weird about that is those things are open. Everybody can see them. Okay. And there are no Scrabble tile holders in the game. I don't know why they decided to talk about that. You also have this set of activity markers. Now, these are basically things you buy using your points to accomplish stuff. Now, why you need them? Well, they serve as a limitation beyond mere income, which is to say that you have this pile of things available and you can choose only certain numbers. And here the numbers are important, and they can affect your purchase of units, your research, your diplomacy, I think. That's how I've been playing it, but there's no space for diplomacy over here when you discard them. And a number of other things. There are other things that they very clearly don't seem to affect. For example, if you're moving factories around, if you're bringing factories online, that looks like you just play money for. You don't have to use these activity counters, which is important because that would pretty much eat up all your activity counters for the turn. The sequence of play is spread out over here. And let's try to go through it with and we'll flip through the rules as needed. So the first thing that happens in the turn is you draw one face-up random event, assess its effects, and then everybody gets a random event. Some people may be getting additional ones if they've done something to deserve them. Then the Russians get their purge card, and the purges have different effects. No purge has no effect. These party purge and military purge each increment this value by 1. They don't explain this 10, 20, 30, and then 1 through 9. But, with a little bit of thinking, you can kind of figure out this is the 10s digit, this is the 1s digit. We got a 0 over here. All right, it's a weird way to represent things, but it fills the space properly. So these will increment the purge by 1. The great purge will increment it by 3. Now, when one of these is taken, they give you certain restrictions. So a party purge says you won't be able to do research or diplomatic expenditures. Of course, it's not going to be that absolute. which is to say, I drew this and chose the research being forbidden, and found out that, well, I actually get some research anyway. It's not absolutely clear which research I get, but I was able to come up with some kind of answer. Here you get a unit purged, which I think removes it from your track, and you can't build any new military counters. That could be really painful because it screws with your reserves. And then the Great Purge, I think, does both. It purges 2 units. Mobilization and military counters are prohibited. Research and diplomatic expenditures are prohibited. This is really terrible, but it moves you further up the purge track. And being moved up the purge track is a good thing. Okay. Then you reveal any public random events that you drew. Then you go to your income phase. Now your income phase is going to be based on the number of civilian factories you have times 2. And there's a little reminder up there to help you get that. Plus any additional income that you've gotten. So here I've got like trade pacts that add, a random event took effect. So I'd be adding 3 to 6. I'd have 9 base income. Then I have to pay for my military units. Now, essentially I have to pay 1 per military unit, and that's noted here on these negative numbers, which also are income. But if I have military factories, those cover a unit each. So essentially, the military factories are worth $1 each, as opposed to the $2 each that the civilian factories are worth. All right. Whatever I come to, I then use and I grab chits from the open pool that's there of counters, and in whatever denominations I like, with the one proviso that I can't take more than 3 ones. And then I get a free draw from here, and I may get an additional free draw. I don't remember if that was the case. I think it was. Maybe not. Maybe you just get 1. Anyway, not too important. All right. Then I hit the industrial segment. And in the industrial segment, there are a series of different things I'm allowed to do in the industrial segment. Those are listed here. There's a factory conversion, research, and construction. All right, factory conversion is the easiest. It costs me $10 to move an idle factory into either a civilian or military factory. And I think it cost me $10 to move a civilian factory into a military factory. I'm looking for the numbers here, but I think it is. Yeah. Okay. There are advantages to both of these. When you move idle factories over to civilian factories, you can get certain chits available, depending on the nation, and it's all specialized by the different nations. I don't know if I have it spelled out there. But so, for example, this tile becomes available when Germany gets its 6th civilian factory, which is its first special one. And they have another one when they get their 7th civilian factory. And then they also got one for conquering the Rhineland. Like I said, I've played for a couple of turns. I'm going to restart before, now that I have some idea of what's going on, before I do the big event, which will lead into a world at war. I don't think I can do too much damage with this game. We'll see. It's definitely not as threatening as what you can do with Days of Decision in terms of completely changing the focus of the war, especially since Days of Decision can, if you play with all the options, can turn into like an anti-Bolshevik crusade or something. All right. So you've got limitations. You can only do one conversion per turn. Sorry. The Russians have further limitations based on their cohesion level. Now, their cohesion is based on the number of purges they have. They have essentially, they start out as low cohesion. I think they go up to medium at 10, high cohesion at 20, and once they hit 30, they're at full cohesion. They no longer gain any points from purges. So that's pretty simple. When you mobilize a factory and turn it into a military factory, you get some additional units. And that is actually spelled out over here. What you get when you get a new factory. So for example, the Germans would be able to get a tank, an infantry, and an airplane, or a tank, an infantry, and an infantry, right? And they have this opportunity to swap one tank out and instead get a shipbuilding once per game, because they've got room for another shipbuilding. When they get that, they'll get this extra shipbuilding token. Now this isn't extra production that they get straight up. This is extra production they can buy with those tiles. Okay. So the next step, and those extra units I'll go over in your reserve units pile, which means you can then mobilize them. Well, this is mobilization. You can actually purchase them then. And this is actually a mirror image of some of the stuff that happens in a world at war. It's just handled in a less intuitive fashion. You know, you're not, well, I don't know. They both have their own systems for this. I'm not too worried about it. Anyway. So after you do that, now there's specific limitations for each country, and this is what makes the game, you know, the rulebook take as much space. Is like a world at war, it's all done by rules by exception, I guess. And like a world at war, it's not done with some sort of, you know, really strong general case and then a few exceptions. Instead, it's done by a kind of cookbook style set of special cases for each country. But okay. The units will not be built, will not be available to be built right away, and you can again use the time track, I guess, to keep track of where they go. That is not noted anywhere. No, we have mobilization cost. So mobilization gets cheaper, although this is not, I think, noted in the rules. Yeah, it is. Okay. I didn't get far enough for that to take an effect. But yeah, if you start mobilizing military factories early, it costs you 10. But as you go further and further into the game, it starts costing you less and less. And that's actually affected by the aggression index. The more aggressive Europe is, the more aggression there is in Europe as a whole, the cheaper it's going to be to mobilize your military factories and get more units on the line. It'd be too much of a political cost otherwise. Okay, so anyway, the turns will have, the units that you get from the mobilization will have a certain delay in play. Okay, one of the other things you can do, and of course the mobilization delays are based on which country you are. Not for the most part. For the most part, it's based on the type of unit. The one exception is one of the British, or maybe that's all British units, I think it's only one, of the British units actually gets delayed longer because it's colonial troops, essentially. And that's fine. Okay, research. Research is run off these charts, and these charts have lots of information on them which is not explained well at all in the game. What there seems to be, there's a terminology thing, there are steps and levels. Okay. Each cell that's marked with a plus number or icon is a level of research. For every 2 steps, you get a level. Okay. So maybe I've been unable to really grasp this completely. You get some basic research that you just get for free. And then you're going to be allowed to buy an activity counter for additional research. And in addition to that, you may also be able to buy your research only activity factor. So you can kind of pump more of your income into research. I was pumping mine into getting civilian factories online, which I'll probably do in the next playthrough as well. Okay, so unfortunately I'm going to have to rely on the rules a little bit here to catch things that I haven't actually caught, especially since I'm not sure about this levels and steps thing. But basically each box, I guess, is a step. And when you spend a research point, from what I can tell, you just mark one of those steps off. Unlike in a World at War where you make a roll, see how well you did, here you just mark it off. You get sort of a natural progression. Now you're limited. So you buy a certain amount of research tokens to add to your freebie tokens, your freebie research points, and then you're limited. And the first and it depends on the nation you are, of course. Couldn't do anything that general. But so, for example, with the Germans, the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th research have to be done in this section of this chart. The 2nd, 5th, and 8th can be anywhere from here to left, and then the rest of the points can be anywhere on the chart at all. Not quite what the charts seem to express, but that's okay. We have these little stars here. I don't think they mean anything. I think they're from the World at War thing. Now, we'll get to the levels, because I think when you actually get something, you're going to get one of these result markers. The little plus values are going to be, if you convert over to a World at War, you get that modifier on your die roll already earned, okay, once you actually start the game. When you get to some of these, you get a little marker that I think is going to go over in your balance of power chart. But it may go somewhere else. No, it's this color. It's going to go on your support level. It's going to give you a bonus in support. And this is actually clearly stated over here when you look at those things. So this would be like a +1 generic support increase, decrease. You know, you get a bonus once you reach that level of research in something, which obviously it's going to take you quite a while to get to that level. Okay. When you get result, you have to look it up in here to see what the effects of the research are. And for Gathering Storm, they're explained here. A World at War has some additional results. So for example, you know, here's where the star is explained, etc. And we'll see what those will result in as we try to patch the two games together. But I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. I got to pause a little bit. I'm going to need to swap batteries at the very least, but I think I need some air. So, in addition to your basic points that you get for research, and whatever you spend for, you can get additional bonuses. For example, if you have aspiring in enemy research category, well, that allows you normally, so that allows you to place your points differently. It doesn't give you free points. That allows you to place an extra point in the same research project. So normally, that's in any project for free. And that can be in addition, so it does give you a free point. I'm sorry. Now, also, if you're in a Civil War intervention, whether you have any good effect on the Civil War in terms of getting a diplomatic effect, you get a bonus research point, which you can put in one of these categories or one of these specific projects, and only if the nation that is involved in the Civil or is helping the Civil War actually has that category. So, for example, here and the counters match this color-wise. These black ones are German only. These multicolor are both German and Italian, and then the bright green is just Italian. And they share a single research chart. Likewise, the Brits and French share a chart, and they have some research categories where they share and can work together, and others that are only for one nation or the other. In some cases, that only for one nation or the other are duplicated for both nations, and in some cases it's where one nation just doesn't have the capabilities, and those decisions are made kind of in relationship to the same kind of decisions made in a world at war, which were, of course, kind of patched together, but that's okay. All right. Generally, you can only spend one research point for each project. Russia, once they overcome their 30 purges, additional purges they have will generate them extra research instead. Some of the research points you get are restricted. So, for example, the Axis gets 2 German, 1 Italian, 1 intelligence research point, and a German advanced research point. So the German ones have to go into projects the Germans can be involved in. Well, actually that's not specified, but one would assume. The Italian definitely has to go into projects that are Italian only. It can't be given to a joint German-Italian project. And I would assume the Germans can't go to the Italian projects. The intelligence point has to go into the intelligence type of projects. And this is similar to a world at war where you get a free intelligence research no matter what. And then the German advanced research has to go into jets, advanced submarines, and rockets. And what's really ugly about that is you actually have to give it to the one that you're the least advanced in. So you'll always be kind of making some slow advance in those projects, but you're not allowed to, try to hurdle jets up to the top of the chart or anything. I think the Allies can. There's some conditions in which your research points that you're allocating might get bumped, and you're allowed to reallocate them elsewhere. Okay. Random events can give you additional research points. Which could be 1 or 2 levels, or 2 projects going forward a step. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. You're allowed to put into some special projects here, like the West Wall. Once you have the Rhineland remilitarized, once you've retaken it. Anglo-French cooperation can't be done until the Axis try to take something other than Ethiopia and the Rhineland. Just some additional restrictions. Atomic points. There has to be an atomic random event that's been played. Now, they say you have some starting points on the research already occurring. I don't think those matter for anything except to say these tokens are already on the board. They don't affect the chart at all or anything, as far as I can tell. Okay. Now, the cells have to be outlined in red, orange, or gray in order to affect Gathering Storm. Well, I see none that are outlined in those colors. Maybe I'm colorblind. What I do see is these results, which I believe are actually the things that have an effect. And then these over here. The circled numbers, the stars, the pluses, none of that seems to have any effect at all on this game, but it will affect what's translated over when you do a world at war. And I assume I have not familiarized myself with that enough. And I'm going to kind of blunder through this without a really strong direction for a world at war, and that's okay. It's obviously not optimal if you were playing, but yeah, I can live with that. Okay. So then we have specific effects for the research results. So here, the first strategic bombing research result generates a counter which is placed in the air portion of the balance of power chart. And that would be how things like this show up. And basically you follow these instructions once you reach something. Now, preferably you would know what you're aiming towards, but memorizing a whole book of, little different modifiers to my victory conditions, my balance of power and all that, that's just not going to happen for me. It would never happen. Basically, I would probably have a better idea as to what things I want to aim towards after having played it a few times. But since I'm not just playing Gathering Storm, and I'm playing a World at War, I'm going to try to aim to things that I think make some sense to me from my limited remembering of Advanced Third Reich. So yeah, you have this compendium of what these things are going to have effects. Now, some of them are kind of interesting here. So, for example, in addition to the economic preparation, the first step adds an activity counter to the major powers activity pool, and that's actually noted here. You'll have an eco prep counter, so you kind of know that's there. And then the second level adds a 2-point counter, and then a third counter will increase German, British, or Russian support by +1. Is that marked? So that would be this marker here. And three levels, I don't know, is levels the right word? 3 results. And then here they've got another 6 steps, 6 levels. What? Obviously just a typo, but I'm not sure what the difference, what the deal with levels is and why we're worried about it. As far as I'm concerned, you're worried about results. Levels might be of some importance, or steps or something like that. One of them is of importance because it's what you mark down. One of them I think is of importance because it's going to have effects in the transition and not on this game. And that's fine. Okay. When you do intelligence, when you get results, that's how you generate, I think, although again this wasn't entirely clear to me, that's how you generate your little espionage tokens, and they all have their own effects. Now they'll get placed, I think, right after production but before diplomacy. And most of these are telling you, really, really minor little things. They're taking up a lot of wording here to tell you, hey, the first jet research result, 3 levels, 1944, generates 1 counter. The second jet research result, 6 levels, 1943, generates 2 additional counters. I don't know. I don't know why there's that much verbiage in something that maybe a half column of information and a chart could have given very well, but that's not what they chose to do. They chose to use the rule book, and they did this in the World at War II, to spell out every little thing as sets of modifiers, this, that, and the other, and not really worry about trying to use the rule book to give you a grasp. Okay, then the third part of your economic phase is building military units. Now, building military units is really just moving them from the reserve to the active units pile. In general, it costs you 2 activity counterpoints. So you have to spend to buy activity counters that give you the right points, and then you mark them, I guess, by tossing them into, the discards over there. And you'll get those back at the end of the turn, I think. And this is important because you have to have your activity counters to do these, just like you had to have research counters to put extra money in. You're limited to 1 unit of each type in a single turn. Now, the Russians might be required, if they don't have their garrison in place, to build new units to match the garrison. For shipbuilding, it works almost exactly like a World at War. Your ships start off in spaces. When you hit that turn, like if you hit a summer turn and you're like this, if you spend 2 activity points, you can launch the ship, and then I guess it goes here, and it'll count towards your battleship race. It may count towards other things too. I don't know. I don't think so, because like light ships are totally valueless in this, I think, except for the technology on them. Well, you don't get to build them though. If you don't have the 2 points to spend, you can just bump it forward and you'll get the chance next turn to do it. If you do spend, you drop down 1 space, and then next year you get another chance. There doesn't seem to be any accelerated building in this one. Maybe there is. No. You start with a certain capacity of ships you can have on your chart. You can upgrade that by buying an additional shipbuilding capacity. You get that through mobilizing military factories and then not taking your armor, for example, taking that instead. If you upgrade your shipbuilding capacity, you may be getting an additional activity chit. If you want to build new ships, you have to use a ship chit in addition to your generic activity chits that you can use towards that. If you want to set out, lay down a new ship. Okay. And then, yeah. So the battleship race is going to be a comparison of the biggest battleships, the biggest and bestest battleships. And basically, if you can beat the other guy or the other alliance by 2 of the biggest and bestest battleships, you're going to get a balance of power bonus by 1 point in your favor. That seems pretty puny to me, but that's what it is. Oh, wait. You put a generic ship counter on the naval balance of power chart whenever you build a ship. So we don't have any generic ship counters, so I guess you either ignore that or use the named ships. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to use the named ships for that instead of using this launched ship space, I guess, because there does not seem to be the counter that they described there. That's no big shock. Okay. So then we have this little chart which has nothing to do with the game. We've already kind of explained the balance of power, how the points are generated from here. And, you know, the difference is limited by these instructions here. Okay. And that's going to give you additional support level, which, you know what, I didn't go into what your income is, and I should jump back to that in a moment. But after you calculate your balance of power off those charts, it's going to give you an advantage in diplomacy by allowing you to place additional military counters on the board. Military counters are going to act as a certain diplomatic pressure. It gives you benefits in reaching your declaration of war thresholds, I guess. And it also is going to be an effect on the Russian garrison. The more Axis military units there are, the more Russian military units have to be built as well. Unfortunately, I'm not sure why 1 armor and 1 infantry, where that comes from. So we'd have to take a look at that. The Russian garrison. Okay, so if the Axis as a whole has balance of power bonuses here, they get reflected by markers there. And I'm not sure why there's an armor and an infantry there, except that that's what this picture shows. I don't think it really makes a difference. All you have to do is cover this with some counters to indicate that the Russian active units are matched up against the Japanese fixed amount of units and the European Axis. And if that's not a case, you get some kind of penalty. Okay, let's go back to income. because we skipped that. So the income is made from this chart here. Actually, I went through it vaguely. The civilian factories produce $2 each. Whatever your support level is, right, which is affected by balance of power and random events and all kind of other stuff, whatever that is adds to your income. Any trade pacts you have add to your income. Any effects from the economic climate, random effects charts, and then you subtract your maintenance cost from that. And that's going to be how many tiles points you can buy. Okay. And those tile points can be used for building factories, and they can be used for activating these points, and which get you military units, research, diplomacy, everything else. Okay. Russia has some special rules. The garrison, if they don't meet their garrison requirements, which will be the total of their military units, their research and production result counters. Okay, I don't know. See, the Germans have some, but we don't know if they matter. Russian flags in minor countries. So, in this case, Russia has a flag in Turkey, so I should get something for that. I should probably have a little marker there of some sort. Wasn't really paying attention to that. And this will be compared to the total of the Japanese forces in Manchuria, which are already added up. The Axis Army net and armor, infantry, and air balance of power. The European Aggression Index, Axis and Allied flags in minor countries bordering Russia. If anybody has any points in any flags in Poland, and that is this marker here, I guess. There's actually 2 Poland flags. One, I think, for people, I don't know. Yeah. Any other minor countries, though, if there are trade pacts in them, you get flags marked against you. So the Polish flag is already there because there's a Allied trade pact. There should actually be 2 Polish flags in there to count against me. Now, what's weird is these are over here instead of up here, so I gotta kind of match these out. Now, I have that flag. This is probably a research result. There's some research result here in flags. I don't know what that is. I didn't catch that. I'll find it by next time I play. Like I said, this is the part of the rules that, it starts falling apart for me. Because it is really just compendium here. And we'll get to it. It'll eventually start making some sense. So if the Russians don't have enough garrison, they lose a support for a missing counter, -2 for 3 missing counters, and some kind of calculation there. If they have extra counters, their support level goes up by 1 for a surplus counter, up by 2 for 3, sort of the mirror. If their support level is positive, they can place military counters to modify diplomacy in, it looks like, their border states. We talked about purges largely. I'll ignore going back over that. Siberian garrison units can only be purged if there's nothing else, and I don't know what those are. I think that's going to be this line here. I would look it up specifically if I need to. We have a support value for cohesion, so Russia actually should have had a -1 to their support that I haven't been tracking. And that's actually not been distilled. Whoever's this guy's thing here, I think he said all support levels are pretty much at 0, but maybe I missed something, I'm not sure. But I don't see anything about, there's a Russian garrison research result. I don't know what a Russian garrison research result is. I don't think I have a marker for that. Yeah, I don't see a marker for that, which is why there isn't one on there, because I couldn't figure out what that's supposed to be. There were no counters that matched this, and so like this and this. There's some counter there, but it's notional, I guess. That's not explained either, of course. Nothing to do with these tracks is explained at all. So anytime we start getting to them, I'm making guesswork here, right? Okay, so yeah, the setup that I had didn't talk about this, but I think the support level for Russia starts out at -1 because of the low cohesion. And Russia gets additional activity counters as it increases cohesion. Once it has its mobilization rate of civilian factories, well, of any factories to military factories, and it can never mobilize new civilian factories. Its mobilization rate per turn increases as its cohesion goes up, and something else. I don't know. Oh yeah, they can't begin mobilizing their civilian factories. They can only mobilize their idle factories. Idle factories don't do you a damn thing, so you want to get them moved out as quickly as you can. Of course, most of the countries I was mobilizing their civilian factories, idle factories to civilian, because that's always going to cost $10, but as tensions go up, your military factories become cheaper to create. Okay, I think it's time to take a rest. As with a world at war, there's no little page number here, so I don't know how far I'm through. I'm gonna look here and see. I'm well over halfway. All right, the EAI. So in general, this is most of the points from it seem to come from random events that affect for the turn. However, there's some permanent effects for each Nazi aggression. You get a point within a certain list. If the Nazi-Soviet pact's been played, the economic climate can have an effect. Civil wars that are currently in effect have an effect. But there's also a residual effect to this, which is, let me see, at the start of each turn, one temporary modifier is removed, and then any random event and economic climate effects are applied. It looks like the temporary modifiers are the random events in the economic climates. So they kind of can build up. And if they keep going in the same direction, they may not erode as quickly as you'd expect. You also get increases to this. Mobilization costs, converting factories to military use. Oh, that's the reduction in cost of the, this is the effect. Shipbuilding costs will be increased or decreased based on the EAI. Declarations of war are made easier with the EAI, and you'll see that's an important factor towards the Axis crises. When the Axis creates a crisis, they have to be careful. If the tensions are too high, that may allow the Allies to declare war. The Russian garrison is affected by the tensions, and of course the Nazi-Soviet pact itself is affected by the tension level. The less the tensions are, the more it's pro-Soviet. Alright, so for diplomatic phase, you have a number of different things you can play. that'll affect diplomacy. There's military counters, which are these little tanks. And you're going to have a certain number of these available, and they're just sort of freebie diplomacy values that you can toss into places by making a threat, basically, against that country. That you force it more towards your side, or you're just more powerful and you scare their enemies away, whatever. The Germans have the anti-Comintern marker. And the stronger that Russia is in terms of its purge levels and its cohesion, the stronger the value of this counter is going to be. It starts out at 1 and works its way up to 3, and it's essentially a diplomatic counter that can be played in the territories next to Russia. You can also purchase diplomatic counters, and some of those those will just be your point counters that you have available to you, and you pay those tokens, the tile points, to buy these guys, and you can slap them in the countries. You can slap them in hidden, like this. And it's always done in the order, everything in the game: Germany, Italy, Britain, France, then Russia. So Germany would place its counters first, kind of like in Origins of World War II, except they're hidden here. And that's important because, among other things, you have A0 marker, which you can toss in to kind of obfuscate what the hell's going on. Essentially, the diplomacy is going to work out as whoever's got the most points is there, gets that many flags in an area. And you can remove opposing flags. So if the Germans, put points into Poland, well, if they were left alone with 1 point, they'd be able to remove a French flag from Poland. All very deterministic, except for the hidden aspect of it. Now, the goal of this, largely, is to get yourself up to trade pact level. Once you have a trade pact, that's going to show up on here and affect your income. But these may also affect the victory points in Gathering Storm. I'm not sure of that. I've been looking at the World at War translation, and these are going to affect your core diplomatic value with that nation, which is really a huge bonus as far as I can see it, and maybe a major factor in these. Of course, the Germans did very well historically in terms of having a lot of minor allies in Central Europe. What's this? Here's who can pick things as targets or something? I don't know. This is part of the setup, I think. So like Albania has a +1 from Italy. This is how the setup is defined in these rules. This is one of the best indications of it. So, you've got to page through every single rule to distill what the setup for the game is. And that's one of my big gripes, because the rules are hard enough to understand and comprehend without that. And then they've got this added burden of, yeah, we're not even going to give you a setup. You're going to figure this out. Now, you can see they actually provide on-map resources to help you see what that setup is in that particular case. In some of the others, though, not so much. You also might get modifiers from the cards, your event cards, and these might be secret events, can get turned over and change the nature of the points that'll be in place. The anti-Comintern marker has certain restrictions to it. It only shows up in the most communist country of those that are available for it. So that's actually an important factor to it. If you put diplomatic points into a country, though, where the anti-Comintern marker is, and I think that includes military forces, you have to bump the anti-Comintern marker to the next place in your order. Okay, what about the Nazi-Soviet pact? Well, that's got its own special rules, so we're going to skip over that. Civil wars. So through the event card, civil wars can occur. When I was playing my solo game, and I'll be doing another one, there's a random start to how many Civil War prelude counters, I don't know what you want to call, are in Spain. The other countries that have civil wars possible, Greece and Yugoslavia, start with none. But Spain starts with between 1 and 3. Once you get up to 5, I think it is, the civil war starts, and then it continues until you've removed all those counters. You're allowed to do diplomacy on a country before the Civil War, but you can only do it within the Civil War as a part, if you're one of the countries actually supporting the Civil War. Okay, once the 5 chits come up, you'll end up having an outbreak of the Civil War, and something happens. So we have some specifics here that I don't want to think about. This is really a big random event is all it really comes down to. Okay. So the goal in a civil war is sort of a diplomacy action. If you intervene in the Civil War by putting your military counter in support of your faction, this doesn't have to follow normal support balance of power and Russian garrison requirements, which means, for example, the Germans might not have any support points. They could still throw support into, say, the Spanish Civil War. And there's a good reason for that, because you get a technological improvement that's sort of free bonus stuff. However, if you intervene in a civil war, you have to spend a strength activity counter that costs a tile point. So you'd have to buy one of these suckers and throw it in there. The government gets +1 modifier in Civil War diplomacy. You total the value of the diplomatic effort. This is your intervention level. Then you draw a numbered Civil War counter from the pool of Civil War counters. I don't know what those are. Those might be these. I'm not sure. That's not specified that I've found. I haven't done this, so I haven't pushed through it yet. And that'll be the intervention threshold. That's increased by the value of random events for the Civil War, played by the non-participating alliance. If both sides have the same intervention level, there's no effect. If one side exceeds the other by an amount less than the intervention threshold, that faction gets a diplomatic advantage. If they exceed it by an amount equal to or greater than the intervention, they get a diplomatic result. An advantage happens if one yeah, thank you. They get an additional diplomatic counter. That's what this says. Maybe. That's what it says in bold. The major power that contributed the most to the intervention level may place an additional diplomatic counter in the following turn, and that is the Civil War counter. And that just says activity, but I guess it's limited to being diplomatic activity. Shit. Flags don't change. Civil War counter remains in play, and may be redrawn in a subsequent turn. Again, I don't know what the Civil War counter is. It may be these. Those are the only thing I can think of, but if you get a diplomatic result, you get the additional diplomatic counter, you get a flag placed or removed, and one Civil War counter, the one that was drawn for that turn, is removed for play. So I think you're going to have 5 Civil War counters here. Whichever one is randomly drawn is the points that you have to exceed as your threshold, is what I'm catching from this. But I'm not going to read it too hard until we hit it. Once you remove all 5 Civil War counters, the Civil War will end. These can be removed through diplomatic results or random events. If Italy attacks Greece or Yugoslavia while in the midst of a civil war, the civil war ends the turn of the crisis phase. If general war breaks out during a civil war, something happens. This has no effect on Gathering Storm or the I don't know. You know. So then there's specifics for a victory in Yugoslavia, but nowhere else. Right. Because Yugoslavia can actually split into 2 countries. I don't know what these split values are. Again, maybe we'll see, maybe we won't. After a country has had a civil war ended, you can't diplomatize it anymore. However, it can be hit by random events. You can only have 1 civil war per turn. Okay, the concept of the crisis phase. So this took me a lot to figure out. The rules for this are not at all sensible, which is pretty much par for the course in this game. But there is a helpful sheet somewhere. Here it is, which gives the general outline of play that's explained in the rules, and really there's no more in the rules. Italy or Germany can announce an aggression. They have a limited set of countries they can announce aggressions into. Britain and France then are allowed to either acquiesce in the aggression, in which case, hey, the Axis power, if it's Germany, they take it over. If it's Italy, they start a process of conquering the country. Or they can oppose it, and we go further. And we go to an Axis response. If the Allies oppose the aggression, the resistance level of the target will be determined. So this is going to be determined based on this black number. What was the red number again? I don't fucking remember. That's some victory point thing or something. And then you draw a random tile and add that to the total. Now, Ethiopia is a special case. It's always a 1 resistance. The aggressor reveals any secret support events it holds. And the Axis aggressor has the option to back down or continue. Now, if they back down, they have some penalties that are assessed against them. Then the Allies have the option to reveal, and they must reveal any secret support events that they have. And then they either back down, or if they meet the declaration of war threshold, they can make an ultimatum. If the Allies back down, they suffer some penalties. Okay. If the Axis rejects the Allied ultimatum and continues its aggression, at this point, the war will break out and the game ends. The question is, how about this threshold? Well, this is not explained in the rules worth a damn. The threshold section is over here under Allied declarations of war and such not. And the way it's explained, the only thing I can guess is if you can beat a 0 or a negative value or something like that. You basically have this series of modifiers. That's the best I can come up with from it. The way the rules itself are stated is written here. So there's no statement as to how you determine, whether you met the threshold or not. There's just a list of things that modify this threshold. And, maybe, I don't know. Because balance of power and support levels are all factored into this. There's not like something that I can even think of that you would compare to the threshold. But basically what happens is you add the resistance of the country, including the chit that it pulled, to the support levels for the Allies, compared to the support levels for the Axis. Compared to adding any secret stuff in there. For some reason, flags in Russia, no, that only affects the Russian war. But declarations of war on the Allies can have problems if there are any eastern neighbors to Germany which have flags. Basically, if there's alliances in, say, Poland or Czechoslovakia, that can cause Germany a bit of a headache here. But that's only if Germany is declaring war on the Allies. It doesn't seem to affect the Allied declarations of war on Germany, so it's not going to strengthen the Allied resolve to have these treaties here. All right. And yes, we're going over things kind of quickly at this point because I don't know them that well. I have worked through that mechanism, so I can go a little bit speedier than I was with some of the rest. With Italian aggressions, you're going to have to handle fighting. In the case of Ethiopia, which I did, it's 3 turns. In the case of the others, I don't know. I think Italy has to overcome the strength of the ally or of the minor country, and each turn they check that, and they're going to have to do that a certain number of times or something. Nazi-Soviet pact. The Nazis have the option to offer a pact, and basically what's going to happen is there's going to be a set of values determined by the current situation, and that allows, well, the more it favors Russia, the more the Germans have to offer to Russia in order to get the pact accepted. The pact will automatically be accepted by the Russians, though. It's just, it comes with a cost, and that cost is kind of prefigured in the game. There's no negotiation of it. I'm going to ignore these rules. Yeah, I mean, not when I'm playing, but I just don't see too much. And again, the Germans have their own threshold that they have to meet when they make a declaration of war, as far as I can tell. It looks like it. It's not using the same wording, but what the hell. Italy can't declare war on a major power. Russia also has its own threshold. It needs a net modifier of +1. So this is actually spelled out in a better way than the historical case, I believe, which doesn't have anything like that about the threshold hitting +1. Probably just a rules omission. But I tell you, when you're reading these rules, there's enough rules omissions, and the format is shitty enough for anybody who likes to read rules and try to understand them as opposed to rely on them as a reference. Like, my feeling with these rules, the words I would use for them is, these rules aren't too bad if you already know the game and you're only using them as a reference. They're not great, but they're not too bad. If you don't know the game, forget about it. I mean, seriously. Nothing's worth this headache unless you're a World at War fanatic already, and this is the one thing you were dreaming about, and you don't know about World in Flames and Days of Decision, which obviously are far superior in terms of what they provide you, but they don't mesh with a World at War. And honestly, a World at War doesn't allow you the same sandbox capability that World in Flames does. So if you're already sold on a World at War, world, and that's why this game, the only support for this thing is on the Yahoo group that Bruce Harper runs, right? It's like GMT. There's nothing at Concept World. There's nothing at BGG. It's just like, screw you, man. Come to our little fucking Yahoo group, or, try to figure out the rules on your own, asshole. Yeah, that's pretty much the attitude I got. I read some replies by Harper, and it's like, oh, you must be an imbecile to think this game isn't perfect. Yeah, whatever. Okay. And no, those weren't replies to me. It's just other people were complaining about, I can't figure out a damn thing about this. It's a broken game. It doesn't have the rules necessary to play. Yeah, that's the impression you get. They're probably mostly in there. I'd say like 80% of the rules are actually available here. A World at War is much, much stronger. It's been through a lot of, rigor through the time. I still have the opinion that, it was a wrong turn. There is your maximum level, but we'll see as I play it out. because, you know, my initial impression is not perfect. Essentially, the game ends when the war starts between the great powers. And you determine a victory, and what you do is you look at this chart and you say, oh shit, where are my points? Okay. Well, I get points for support level. I get penalties for unmobilized factories. You want to get your economy entirely on a war factor. I get points for the balance of power charts. I get points for completing aggressions as the axis. I get points for each trade pact, depending on the quality of the pact. I get nothing for research. That's already included over here and over in the support levels to some extent. So they're already factored in. And then if there's a war with no Axis aggression, whoever declared the war takes a penalty of 5. So there's a strong disincentive to declare a war in this game, unless it's over something important. And that is perfectly reasonable in my opinion. And then the Axis gets a point. Well, the Axis and the Russians get points based on how good the Nazi-Soviet pact is if it exists. And the Allies get nothing for that. All right, that's the value here. And it really turns out to be, you know, some kind of point salad, essentially. It's a very, very complex evaluation trying to capture how well one side has a chance of winning the World at War game if it comes forward, but it's probably pretty bogus. For example, there are things in here that I think are barely even covered in the victory point calculation. For this, the main core, and I'm not going to go into this in any real detail at all, is it's going to tell you what the forces you have here translate into. And that may be modified, for example, in the case of armor, by your armor research values. So there's new military counters, like these 3-6 German armor. If the Germans don't get sufficient armor results, they'll get crappier armor. The Italians can get better armor. I think the French can too. You'll also have defensive hexes that'll come up from building either West Wall or Maginot hexes. And the initial status is there's no West Wall, and the Maginot is just fortifications rather than fortresses in 35. So you have this extension that happens based on the research that you can achieve there to strengthen your position. You'll be able to generate your BRP base based on what factories you've mobilized already. That'll also affect your force pool. Some of the research, it's not going to pay off a real big hit. Your research is going to have more effect once you're in a world at war, I believe. That's kind of the feeling I get. The values that show up from over here, these steps have effects on a world at war. It's not until you hit a green or red result, or these browns over here, that you get something that affects Gathering Storm itself. But all these intermediate effects have small effects in a world at war. But one thing you'll see when we do the translation is some of those big research effects are really not that big. They're not like a research effect in a world at war. They're more like a partial effect, giving you a partial bonus. So this becomes a smoother chart than maybe it looks with those results in there. And when you're hitting Gathering Storm, if you're looking at the victory points for that, you want to hit these results. You don't care about the intermediates, at least as far as I recalled. So things like atomic research, If you succeed in that, that just sets the date by which, well, no, not atomic, jets. That just sets the date by which you can first start researching jets. Although there's the possibility if you get a full result in jets, you'll have some kind of prototype available initially, but you still have to wait a couple of years. Maybe quite a few years. I don't know. If you have jets, you're probably pretty, if you have full jet results, you're probably pretty far into Gathering Storm. I don't know what happens if you hit winter of 40. I think you just keep going. Like I said, diplomacy. These minor country diplomatic alignments that are set in a world at war, those are modifiable by the number of flags you have. It's a random chance, actually. But if you have a trade agreement that improves it, if you're all the way up to 4 flags, you get a guaranteed bonus and a possible increment as well. It's possible some countries that were eliminated historically before the war started will still be around, things like Austria and Czechoslovakia. And their force pool is now available. There's actually here's a cute little solution. There's a little map overlay that you can toss on top of the main map if Austria or Czechoslovakia is still in the game. You won't need that if they're not, and there's probably very good reason for Germany to focus on these. They come each with an extra factory. That factory only is really available if you either absorb them in Gathering Storm or if you achieve, I think it's a trade result with them, but it may be all 4 flags. In that case, you get an economic penetration and that factory becomes available to you along with the troops and everything else. So, but notably, if you enter into a world at war without that factory and you don't get it through the economic penetration, you're kind of stuck without it, and that would be a big hit against Germany if they can't get Austria and Czechoslovakia's factory. We're assuming they get the Rhineland factory. That would be pretty hard to deny them. It's also possible Yugoslavia could have Croatia broken off of that. Poland, its status could be interesting here. It could end up as a German satellite state. It could end up not split if the pact doesn't involve splitting Poland in half. The Russian cohesion level, if that doesn't get high enough, Russia's mobilization level is further than it would be historically. It's also possible, though, that Germany could go for a Russia first move, especially if Russia's kind of weak, although that may be the worst time to do it. In which case they get a quicker mobilization from that point. We have rules to set the Russian-German tensions if there's a pact, the U.S. tensions, which start at like -50 instead of 0. And then it talks about the U.S. and the Pacific and Japan, which, of course, since they're not involved in this at all, automatically do exactly everything that they did up until fall of 39 or whatever, and you don't even enter with the Pacific map until then. So for example, if this game goes and ends early in say 38 with Munich or something, the Japanese don't enter the game until later along with the US. Likewise, if the game goes beyond fall of 39, the U.S. actually enters at that point, and Japan enters at that point, and you start playing on the Pacific map, and you'll keep going with this, and we'll have to figure out what's going to happen based on when this actually ends. We have some specific rules changes as well, mainly to help integrate a world at war. I've heard there's errata that there's a living rules set that changes some of those rules. In fact, some of this booklet as a whole, I could not find actual errata though. All I can find is the living rules document. Well, I don't want to deal with a living rules document that's like 60 pages long and try to hunt down the changes. If a game can't handle a change log, it's not important enough. The game's meant to work as written. I can understand errors come into play, especially minor errors that aren't of significance. I got the feeling they're probably significant errors. But screw it, man. If they can't even give me a change log, we'll go as written. All right. There was something else I wanted to... Well, I wanted to peek at the battle manual here. This, unlike playbooks that GMT gives you, this is mainly just a reference of various things that you absolutely need, charts that aren't provided elsewhere, information that's not elsewhere. Very important, the summary of the units and counters, that's not anywhere else. This glossary of key terms, not anywhere else. So this is sort of a part of the rulebook. Kind of wish they had done something like this with A World at War. Split it into multiple books, right? Nah. They wanted to put that cheap-ass binding on it so it'll fall apart. I feel like there was something else I wanted to cover. Don't know what it is. I know I sound really down on the game, and I am. Between the crappy rules and not meeting, the expectations that I had that it would be similar to Days of Decision, that it would actually provide me with the sandbox type event. It is pretty disturbing to me on those sides. On the other hand, I am still somewhat excited about A World at War because I do remember liking the A3R system better than WIF back in the day. Now, like I said when I was looking at A World at War, it may have gotten too bloated and too overburdened with lots of special crap just clapped onto it and kind of bolted into place. We'll see. This certainly wasn't bolted into place. This is purely a prequel game. It's like the old Days of Decision if you strip away the Pacific aspect of it, right? In a lot of ways, it's limited decision making. I don't see playing it as a game on its own, although I do see playing, say, DoD 2 or 3 that way. I don't see playing this any more than I would the original DoD. I see this as having only one purpose. This is a scenario generator for A World at War, and not a very extensive one. One that maybe players don't have a hell of a lot of flexibility on. Of course, you could spend, you can make some choices like press the Z plan hard or refuse to build navies with Germany because there are a lot of advantages that accrue to them, I think, by avoiding navies, and I'm very likely to do that. Anyway, we'll see how it works out. Overall, I'm pretty disappointed from this point of time right now. I have some setup to do again tomorrow, but I might be able to get it started and start videoing. I got through 2 turns of it, to try to get a playthrough. I don't feel like I really feel terribly comfortable with the rules, but I feel as comfortable as I would have had I skimmed a rule book that made sense before playing, which is, okay, less than I usually do, but just to give you an idea where I am. But by actually moving some pieces around and everything, I have a vague idea of how everything falls together. So much of it is just these hard-coded, charts and oh, this causes this. I'm going to forget a lot of that shit. The play aids aren't sufficient to give that to me, to remind me that, oh yeah, I have to do the, I have to put a little piece here when there's nothing that tells me to do that, right? I have to make the rule up as I go as to how to cope with those charts. Overall, the support for this game is absolute crap. The designer has basically, said screw you to everybody except for in his own little Yahoo group world. So, but, assholes as designers is something that we're not completely unused to. Doesn't mean that the game's terrible. We'll give it a little bit of a look.